What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Marketing Nomad Show. It's your favorite marketer and podcast host. My name is Prit. Welcome to today's episode where we're here with international speaker and co-founder of Reading Habit, Danny Brassell. Danny, how are we doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on today, Prit, and thanks for all that you do to spread positivity around the world. We need a lot more of it.
Oh, thank you so much, Danny. Alrighty, for those of you who are tuning into this episode today, we're actually going to be talking about developing good reading habits as a business owner and entrepreneur. So we're going to be talking to Danny here today. We're going to be talking about how to cultivate the habit of reading and how to basically read more. Why is reading so important for entrepreneurs and business owners? And we're also going to be talking about actionable tips that you can implement so that you can read more. Danny, are we ready to go?
I'm ready, Prit. Let's go.
Alrighty, Danny. Can you please introduce yourself? Let our listeners know who are you and why did you start this mission?
Well, so again, I'm Danny Brassell. My last name is really easy to remember how to spell. Spelled like Brassell. No, I never took any grief over that as a child. And I'm on a mission to bring joy back into education in the workplace by transforming struggling and reluctant readers into more passionate and proficient readers. And it's ironic because I grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian and I always hated the public library. It always smelt funny to me. The furniture was always uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a freaky homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out in the library. I always hated the library. But it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I recognized that a lot of my students didn't have the resources I had available to me as a child. And I pointed the finger back at me and I said, shame on me. I was very blessed, Prit. Both of my parents were married and together. We weren't a very wealthy family, but we always had food on the table to eat, so we never had to worry about that. My parents read in front of us, they read to us, and they had plenty of reading materials around us. And it really became something very important to me, watching the way schools work. I've been in education now for 25 years, and I always say, well, schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch television. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own. And I see so many of my friends that are now entrepreneurs and business owners that they claim that they don't read. And I can show them all kinds of quick tips to incorporate reading as a habit, because reading is essential. If you're not reading, you're not growing. If you're not growing, everybody else is passing you by.
Wow, I think that we had such a mighty start, Danny. I think that you are absolutely right when you say that, if you are not reading, you are not growing. And if you're not growing, then, well, everyone's saying bye-bye to you. That's absolutely true. For me personally, I think my dad actually used to make me read every night as a kid. Those Enid Blyton books. And he would say, no, you're not running away today. You're going to sit here with me. You're going to read for half an hour. And I think over time, initially I was very reluctant. I was just like you, I'm like, no, I'm not going to read. Why am I being forced to do this? And then over time, I think I gradually just got so enveloped into the world of books and I started reading on my own. So I personally have developed the habit of reading over time, and I have my father to thank for that. So, it's really nice when you were telling me that, your dad was a librarian and he was very keen on you reading, but you just didn't like public libraries. So I really resonated with that.
The only thing I read as a kid was a TV guide. I wouldn't read anything. It was a real pain.
Well, I really resonated with that. My parents would take me to the public library every single week. On Sundays, that was one thing that they would do. So I have to thank them for that. I mean, it's really challenging to take a kid who does not want to be there to a public library. So that was really, nice to hear your
Well, and
story.
that was it, but that's probably one of the reasons you became a reader, Prit. I always
Yes,
tell people all it takes is somebody significant in your life to model
yes,
that behavior and encourage you to do that. I mean, I don't care who I've ever worked with. Once a week, if I'm working with students, for example, once a week I'll give a kid a book. I'll say, hey, you know what? I was reading this book, Prit, about this famous entrepreneur. I think you'd like it. Check it out. I always ask people, what do you think the odds are that Prit's going to open up that book? In my experience, 100%, because somebody showed interest in you.
yes,
You might not read it, but
yes,
you are going to open it. And I find
yes,
by the fourth time I do that with a person, they actually try and read the book, because there's nothing more powerful than somebody significant in your life, a parent, a teacher, a coach, a pastor, a buddy, an older sibling saying, you know what, I was thinking of you when I was reading this. So it's very simple psychology on how to get people excited about reading. I mean, and that's really one of the points I make to people. Research is really clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. You know, people who read more read better. The happiest day of my life, besides my wedding day, was when I earned my PhD. My wife was asking me why I was so happy, and I'm like, because from now on, I pick the books. And so this is a tip for your listeners. If you really want to become a reader, and I've dealt with people that are 65 years old and never read a book, and I'm like, well, if you're unhealthy at age 65, does that mean you just give up? You stop walking? Well, no. It's the same thing with reading. I can make you into a reader, but we got to find out what you're interested in. So this audience is a lot of entrepreneurs. Well, I'm going to find books that are interesting. I mean, I just read a wonderful biography by Ashley Vance about Elon Musk. I was fascinated tracking his life. Here's a tip for everybody out there. One of the things I have since 2003, I've had one of the top book clubs online, according to Google, and it's called Lazyreaders.com, and it's a free subscription. But once a month, I provide 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something you can read when you're stuck in a boring meeting or whatever. And it's one of the tips I actually give to people. I'm a lazy reader. Before I go to a party, I'll go to a bookstore and I'll go to the children's section and I'll find a whole bunch of 32-page picture biographies on famous people, and I'll learn a whole bunch of quick little tidbits about them. And then at the party, I sound like this really smart person because I know all this stuff. I didn't read anything sophisticated. I read a kid's book, but that's still reading. And I can tell you, it was doing something like that where I read a little picture book about Elon Musk where I was interested. I'm like, oh, I'd like to read more about Elon Musk. I love reading about, I love Darren Hardy, reading about the entrepreneurial roller coaster. His book, The Compound Effect, is fantastic. I'll read books by entrepreneurs like Russell Brunson and Ryan Holiday. If you really want to get good at reading, you got to figure out what your interest is, and you have to have a narrow reading on that. So if you're into leadership, I encourage you, read books about leadership. And if it's a boring book, put it down. There was over 4 million books written last year alone. Some of them are pretty good. Focus on those. If it's not good, think of reading like a piece of food. If you take a piece of food, you're like, oh man, that's disgusting. Maybe it gets better. Oh no, it's disgusting. Same thing with a book. If you don't like the first chapter, you're probably not going to like the second chapter. Put it down, get something else. I'm sorry, I give long answers to short questions, Prit.
Oh, no, I'm enjoying this. I'm absolutely enjoying, and it is so interesting that you say that, because I think that as a reader myself, there is this obligation that's there at the back of my mind that, oh my God, I have to finish this book. And, even though sometimes I feel like maybe the book's not helping me or I'm not grasping it the way I should, and that's on me, I feel like, oh my God, I've committed to this book, so I have to finish it till the end. And there's always that sense of guilt that's like, oh, that's always, tagging me at the back of my mind. And you're saying it's okay to just dump the book. And I'm like, okay, that's really solid advice. Why didn't I just do that earlier. Like rethinking all those previous moments that, you know, I could have done that. But that's really interesting. I loved, absolutely loved your answer. I know that there was a lot of information that was packed in that answer. We talked a little bit about, you know, when you're 65 and you say you haven't read a book. Now, I know personally a few business owners and entrepreneurs who probably are at the age of 30s or 40s and they haven't read before. Is it too late? I really want your thoughts on that.
No, it's definitely not too late, but you know, with my teams, I always tell them, remember, next time you need to give me an excuse, I want you to give me this excuse. Say, Peru has a new dictator, and they all say, well, what's that got to do with anything? I'm like, well, one excuse is as good as another. It didn't get done, did it? You know, people always will say, well, you know, I don't have time to read. I'm like, yeah, who has time to read after you have a couple of beers, watch TV, go out shopping? I mean, who has time to read? I mean, I have a friend who claims to be a time management expert, and I always laugh at him about that. I'm like, there's no such thing as time management. There's priority management. I was reading this book and it said that over 100 years ago, people only had 24 hours in their day also. It's how you use your time.
Yeah.
You know, and so you can incorporate reading, and believe me, I've done so much research on this. There's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become successful leaders, but I have never read about a successful, effective leader who was not also an avid reader. And if you're looking at entrepreneurs, you know, you look at a guy like Richard Branson who's dyslexic. Well, he could use dyslexia as his excuse not to read, but he reads all the time. Here's a quick tip for anybody that's dyslexic out there. By the way, you're in good company. Over half of the Fortune 500 company CEOs are dyslexic. Famous people in history like George Washington was dyslexic. Tom Cruise is dyslexic. Richard Branson, Sir Richard, you know, but dyslexics, they process things a lot better auditorially. And so that's the tip I give those folks is we'll put in an audiobook. Listen to audiobooks while you're driving to and from work. I mean, if your commute is an hour a day, multiply that by however many days a year you're working. Let's say you're going to work 280 days a year. Well, that's 2,800 hours of time that you have now listening to, actually that's more than 2,800 hours. That's 28,000. I mean, that's almost a college degree right there. That's ridiculous. But that's one way. You know, Warren Buffett is one of the wealthiest people on the planet, and he spends 8 hours a day reading. Elon Musk still reads 3 books a day, and he runs 4 companies. So when I hear people say they don't have time to read, well, if Elon Musk can find time, I think that you can find time. And there's tons of other examples, but that's what I'm always looking for. You know, there's a book I think everybody needs to read. It's an oldie but a goodie. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill was written in the 1930s. And one of the concepts that Napoleon Hill discusses in there, which I think is vital for entrepreneurs, is the concept of a mastermind, forming a group of people from diverse fields and brainstorming ways to help each other solve each other's problems. And it's actually, though I've been in several masterminds, and the best masterminds are when you have people like, this is a school teacher, and this is an entrepreneur, and this is a real estate agent, and this is an accountant. Because when you have people coming from different fields, they think differently, and sometimes they do something in their field where you're like, wait a sec, I could apply that to my field in a different way. And the great thing about the mastermind is, you know, if it's just you can still study famous people from history. I mean, I have people, you know, if I'm looking at compassion and empathy, well, maybe I'll study Gandhi and Mother Teresa and Abraham Lincoln. If I'm looking at leadership, maybe I'll look at Nelson Mandela. What did he do differently than people? What did Teddy Roosevelt do differently? What was Margaret Thatcher's key to success? I'm constantly doing, I mean, and this is why I love technology. I mean, first of all, you can be in Bangalore and I can be in the United States, and we can have this conversation in real time. It's wonderful. And what really gets me excited as an educator, because even though I left the classroom, I'm still a teacher at heart, and I love working with the kids, is right now there's some impoverished child somewhere in the world that's on a dirt floor, barefoot, maybe hasn't eaten dinner. But if that kid has a laptop and an internet connection, they had the same access as the president of Google. The whole world just got a whole lot smaller. And I get excited because you don't have to be born in New York City to change the world anymore. There's some kid maybe in Uti, in Tamil Nadu, on some mountain, and that kid might be the person that saves the planet from climate change. You have no idea. And I get very excited about that. You and I had this discussion. I've done a lot of work around the world, and India, my time in India was just precious. I can't wait to get back to India. Everybody is just beautiful and so hospitable. And I was speaking at a school of 5,000 girls, and these two girls come up to me after the presentation. One wanted to be a doctor, other one wanted to be a lawyer. And I said, that's great. Are you going to go to university here in India, or maybe you'll go to Great Britain or the United States? And they said, oh, we're girls, we can't leave India. I'm like, get back in that auditorium. I got them all back in, and I said, now is your moment, ladies. Within 5 years, India is going to become the largest country on the planet in terms of population. You're a very young democracy. You're just over 70 years old, yet you've already elected a woman prime minister. America still hasn't elected a woman president. I mean, right now, there are twice as many women in India as there are people in the United States. There are actually more women in India with a graduate degree than there are people in the United States. And I looked at all those young ladies and I said, hey, you just made it my mission. The next CEO, the next successful entrepreneur, the next really good parent is coming out of this audience. I'm like, I always tell this to my students. Sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. They only give me the best and the brightest, and we're going to succeed. You got to have a mindset. And the way I keep that kind of positive mindset, one of my mentors was a guy by the name of Zig Ziglar, and he said, motivation is like bathing. It's temporary. That's why we suggest you do it regularly. And so that's one of the tips I give to all entrepreneurs is during your lunch break, when everything's freaking out, take 10 minutes and read something that lifts you up, whether it's reading about entrepreneurs, reading something spiritual, reading something that makes you laugh. Maybe you like murder mysteries. We'll read a murder mystery, but something that relaxes your brain. It'll actually help your brain work better throughout the day. Again, a very long answer. Sorry, Prit.
Oh, no. Like I said, there's just so much of information I'm writing down as well as you go. And I first off, let's talk about, let me talk about the picture book that you picked up. And I think that for people who struggle with reading, they see a whole page of words, and this is something that people have personally come and told me. They get scared, it's like they can't get through the entire book because they see the first page, it's just a lot of words. They're not used to it and they don't know how to get to the next page. And I think that your advice of, even just taking a picture book and going through it can actually give you so much value. I have not thought of it in the way that, when you said you had a picture book that taught you about Elon Musk, and then you were able to gain more interest about it and then move on to a bigger book with lots of words in it. And I think that that's such a good starting point as well, for people who get scared when they see a book or they're just unsure. They feel like maybe 40 is not the age where they can pick up a book, or 30 is not like too late. I really like that. And I think that audiobooks as well, really great idea, because I think that we travel all the time. We're either in the car or on the train, or, we're usually not in one place. And if you can't have a physical book with you to take around, there are podcasts that, go over the audiobooks. There are audiobooks that you can buy. There are YouTube channels that go over these books as well. So I think that that's also a really nice idea in case people are scared to pick up the book or words just scare them. So I personally really liked those ideas. And I think that from now on, if someone asks me, what do I do? Because I do have some of my previous clients have actually told me that. They said, Britt, I know that you read a lot, but I'm terrified of reading. You know, I just can't do it. And that I never had an answer. So this is definitely something that I feel it can be easily implemented by people. So thank you
Well, let's
so
make
much
it
for
even
that.
better. Let's serve society even better. So if you are a person that fears that, well, why don't you volunteer to school with young children and volunteer to read that picture? And you can read picture books about entrepreneurs if you want to the little kids. I think that's actually better. I think little kids should be seeing at a very early age.
Yes.
You know, it's not just about Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's about people that start with nothing. I mean, everybody loves that story. It's the person who starts with nothing that becomes very successful, and either with money or in spiritually or health wise or whatever. Everybody needs to see those types of stories. And it was Walt Disney who said people think in pictures, and he's absolutely right about that. As a speaker, I'm constantly looking for anecdotes, and so I'll get anecdotes out of children's. There's an anecdote I tell right now in one of my speeches where I'm talking about a story where there was a king who had this childhood friend who had this annoying habit. No matter what the circumstance, whether it was positive or negative, he always said the same thing: "This is good." Well, the king was out hunting with his friend one day, and the king's friend was always in charge of loading the king's rifle. Well, something went horribly wrong this day. As the king fired his rifle, it blew off his right thumb, to which his friend replied, "This is good." The king was furious at his friend, so he put his friend in prison. Well, a year later, the king was out hunting in forbidden grounds when he was captured by a tribe of cannibals. And as the cannibals tied the king to the stake and put logs at his feet to set him aflame to make him their dinner, one of the cannibals noticed that the king was missing his right thumb. Well, being a superstitious tribe, they never believed in eating anything that was not whole, and so they released the king to his freedom. The king could not believe his good fortune, and as he was running back to the palace, he recalled what his friend had said a year earlier. So he redirected to the prison, released his friend, apologized, told his friend the entire story, to which his friend replied, "This is good." The king couldn't believe his ears. He's like, "How could it be good? I just put you in prison for a year." His friend looked at him and said, "But if you hadn't put me in prison, I would have been out hunting with you, and the cannibals would have eaten me." So everything is about perspective.
Oh, that's a great story. That's a really great story. And I like the fact that, you as an adult, you're still reading children books. And for me personally, I didn't think I was going to mention this, but, recently I picked up, I think 2 Enid Blyton books because I was at like a spa retreat somewhere a little far away, and the only books that they had in their library were Enid Blyton books. So I picked up 2 of them, and I was like, I should probably try rereading these because I remember them from my childhood. And I realized that there's actually a lot of lessons in them. It's just so beautiful how it may seem like a children's book, but it's got a lot of value. And to be honest, like when you're reading it as an adult, a couple of years later, your perspective is very different. The way you absorb the material is very different as well. Maybe because of experience or age or maturity, I don't know. But I realized that I probably should go through all my children books once more because it definitely, I mean, I was an entrepreneur at that time. I mean, I am, but at that time I had just started my business, and there was something about positivity and, how to be positive even in the worst circumstances. And it applied so well to my life at that point in time. So I think that, reading children's books as an adult is not, it's not something that you should be ashamed of, or because I personally was like, I was laughing to myself. I was like, oh my God, if anybody could see that I'm reading children's books right now and I'm actually associating with it, I think people would make fun of me. But I think now that I see it, I think that that was a very wrong thought process of mine. And thank you so much for, telling us
I think
about
that's
this.
great.
I think it's beautiful. It's I'm looking back and I'm feeling so happy that I actually picked up the book, and I'm looking back and I think, yes, okay, I did the right thing and I should be proud of it, and I should, that's something that an international speaker and the co-founder of Reading Habit, if you're saying it, then yes, there's a lot of value to it. So there's a lot of value to it. So thank you so much for that. And one thing that I picked up when you said, it doesn't have to be a book in your field. If you really like murder mysteries, go ahead. If you really like something else, go ahead. Don't just, focus on one aspect, because you never know where you get your ideas from. You never know where you get your inspiration from. And I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was amazing, because even for me as a marketer, as a content creator, I don't look at other accounts that are in my field. I actually look at accounts that have no relation to marketing, and that's where I get my ideas from, because something triggers something else, and that spark leads on somewhere else. So I really like that idea. I've not implemented it for books, so that's definitely something that I'm going to try out and experiment as well. So thank you so much for that, Danny.
Thank you.
Yes. Alrighty. So now let me share a bit of a personal question that I have for you. And that is, for me as a business owner and an entrepreneur, I'm juggling a lot of things. I'm a podcaster, I'm a YouTuber. There's a lot of things that are happening in my life at any given point. One thing that I struggle with, as much as I love reading and I love books, is lack of time, or at least my perception of the lack of time. I think that would be a more accurate way of putting it. So, Danny, in your experience, how do we as business owners and entrepreneurs with such busy lives overcome that feeling or that perception of lack of time?
I'll give you a couple of little tips, Prit, because again, I always laugh when people talk about time management. I'm like, there is no such thing. First of all, there's a book I read that you don't have to read because I already read it, called Essentialism by Mckeon. And he had one line in that book that changed my life. He said, in Greek, the word priority can only be used in the singular. And that changed my life, because every day now I give myself one priority. I can get more stuff done, but I have to get the priority done. And you'll find you'll get more accomplished if you give yourself a focus of one priority every single day. Because I'm a person that loves lists, and I'll have 20 items on my list. And if I finish 19 of them, I still consider the day a failure because I didn't finish all 20, or number 20 was the one I really should have been focusing on, and I wasn't doing that. And so, and your priority, I'm a big believer in well-rounded. Your priority, it doesn't always have to be a business priority. It can be, my priority today is to spend time with my family, quality time with my family. My priority today is to take a 5-mile jog for my health. My priority today, is to do something kind for another human being. Whatever you want it to be, is a priority. There's an exercise I've always done with my teams when they tell me they don't have time. I'm like, okay. I want you to prove it to me. For 2 weeks, I want you to keep a journal, and I want you to be completely honest, and I want you to write down how you spend every minute of your day. Just do that for 2 weeks, and you will be amazed how much time you are wasting every single week. I mean, I usually have, the typical person I'm working with spends between 8 to 12 hours a week on social media. I'm like, that's 1.5 business days that you're spending on social media. Now, I mean, if you're a marketer and that's your job, that's something else, but I don't think most people, that's what it is. It's, posting pictures of what they ate for breakfast. So there's a time thing. When I'm working with parents, so I created the world's leading reading engagement program, which teaches parents how to get their kids excited about reading. And I always tell people, I'm like, well, at least here in America, the average American spends 15 minutes a day on the toilet. Well, make a little library next to the toilet, and while you're on the toilet, you can be reading something on the toilet. I have 3 children of my own, and when I'm packing their lunches for school and they're at breakfast, I open up my computer. There's this wonderful free website brought to us by the Screen Actors Guild. It's accessible anywhere in the world, called StorylineOnline.net. StorylineOnline.net. And what they do is they have all these famous entertainers, different movie stars and famous people, and they read aloud children's books. And what's great is every read aloud, the books are also closed caption. There's subtitles at the bottom, so this is a big thing. I've always taught English as a second language around the world, and a lot of my students are trying to figure out ways to learn English. I'm like, well, if you like watching TV, turn on the subtitles, and it actually helps you. You start to relate, and it actually puts it in context. And so for people that say they don't have enough time, I just challenge them. It's like when people say they're busy to me, I'm like, okay, yesterday I gave 6 speeches, I gave 4 interviews, I spent time with my family, and I had time to take a walk. So show me what you did yesterday. and I love it. I love being competitive with people on that. I'm like, hey, if you can actually prove to me that you're busier than me, then that's fine. But I'm betting we can find time throughout the day, and that's the important thing. So the whole context of my program, it's built on 2 premises. So a lot of people will tell you, here's the 2 numbers I want you to remember, 67 and 20. So the number 67, a lot of people say it takes 21 days to change a habit. And to those people, I say, show me the research. It doesn't exist. It's a completely false number. I know where the number comes from. It comes from a wonderful book written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's a wonderful book. Everybody should read it. Dr. Maltz was a plastic surgeon. And in the preface of the book, he mentioned that he noticed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces. Well, a lot of self-help gurus, a lot of people that I respect and admired, took that number and started telling people, oh, you can do this in 21 days. It's completely fabricated. There's no research on that. Well, researchers at the University of London in 2009 did a habit formation study, and they found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67. And it depends on the type of habit that you're trying to change. So for example, if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast, that might take 18 days to form that habit. But if you want to quit smoking, well, that's going to take 254 days. It's much tougher. And here's why this matters to me, Prit. Let's say you go on a diet and you follow it religiously for 21 days, but then on day 22, you fall off the wagon. Well, you blame yourself. And that's wrong, because research shows on average, it takes 3 times longer than that to form the habit. And so I think it's very dangerous when people throw around numbers that aren't based on any type of research whatsoever. Now, the other number, and this is what's important for everybody in your audience, when I'm talking to parents of kids, but even if you're not a parent, if you're an entrepreneur just trying to figure out how to read better, here's the tip. So researchers were looking at patterns among successful students worldwide, and they found a characteristic that totally surprised them. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. So they looked at the low students, the average students, and the high students. So the students at the bottom of the class, in the 20th percentile, the F students, average less than 1 minute a day of reading outside of school. That's not much of a surprise. That's probably why they're at the bottom of the class. But this did startle researchers. The kids in the middle of the class, in the 70th percentile, the C students, the average students, they average 9.6 minutes a day reading outside of school. And so when I'm doing a live training with parents, this is when the first parent usually raises their hand and says, wait a sec, are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day at home, I can take them from the bottom of the class to the middle of the class? That's exactly what I'm saying. The research is pretty conclusive on this. But this was even more amazing. The kids at the top of the class, near the top of the class, in the 90th percentile, your best students, how much time do they spend reading outside of school? Is it 3 hours a day? No. Is it 1 hour a day? No. It was just over 20 minutes a day. The whole basis of my program is in just over 2 months, we're going to develop a habit where you're always getting in at least 20 minutes a day of reading at home. And here's 2 beautiful things. First one we already mentioned. It counts to listen to it just as much as it does to read it on your own. So audiobooks count. Second point that's really important for people, I'm sorry, I'm getting, so So it counts that that it's audio. And then the second point is they don't have to be consecutive minutes. So if you have 2 minutes here and 2 minutes there, that's fine. I mean, and I think, you know, I'm a big believer in starting and ending your day with something positive to read. You know, so I read a Bible at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, you know, but I mean, I also like to read things that make me laugh. So I'll read something funny. I try to avoid the news because the news doesn't serve me and it just puts me in a foul mood. You know, I like to read about people that do inspirational things. So that's the tip for the people that say they don't have time. I'm like, no, again, it's a matter of priorities. And I want you to actually, and it's a great exercise. I've done the exercise myself where just spend 2 weeks. You don't have to show anybody, just honestly show how you spend every minute of your day. And it will actually freak you out. You're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea I was wasting this much time.
I think that's fantastic. I really liked your tip of, you know, your study where you said it was just 20 minutes for a little over 20 minutes for the top students. And I think that my problem with, you know, my perception of lack of time is that I think I need to spare 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day. But you know, now that you're saying that even 20 minutes or, you know, just 2 minutes here and there is enough and audiobooks count, I think that that's really turned my perception around, frankly speaking, because I think it takes a lot of pressure off you as well, because 20 minutes, yes, I can do 20 minutes, but you know, you tell 1 hour or 1.5 or 2 hours, you know, that's when it gets a little bit tricky in terms of my perception of lack of time. So I really like that.
Think of it the same way as your health. I mean, think of like, just like, instead of taking the escalator, taking the stairs, parking a little bit further away from where you have to go, so you have to walk a little bit further. I mean, just getting in an extra 20 minutes of physical activity every day I mean, again, entrepreneurs, a lot of us are sitting on our butts all the time. I mean, I have a little alarm on my phone, so at the 58th minute of every hour, I have to get up for 2 minutes, and I do jumping jacks, or I run in place or something. And it's just those couple of minutes, though, they accumulate, and it keeps your blood flowing. The same thing with reading. Just give yourself a little bit of time. We always underestimate the power of little changes in our lives.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's really the highlight of today's episode for me personally, because like I said, I think that I put undue pressure on myself, saying, oh my God, I have to dedicate this amount of time. But the fact that you're saying that, you know, 5 minutes here and there is fine, you know, 20 minutes, it adds up. These little things add up. That really makes a difference. And for me personally, it resonates because I don't like reading the news before I sleep, because like I said, there's just too much negativity. And I also like to read something that's funny. Like, I have asterisks that I picked up. I'm doing an asterisk marathon right now. And that's one thing. I think about 6 months back, I struggled a bit with focusing on reading books. And I think that there was this growing frustration in me that I was not reading, because I love reading. Like, I'm really into it. But at that point, I felt that I was not able to dedicate time, or, you know, I was really not able to cultivate that habit back again, and it was really frustrating me. So that's when I challenged myself to have these marathons, like a Harry Potter marathon, or you know, like an asterisk book comic book marathon, or, you know, some kind of, and that's actually worked, you know, because I feel like I'm in a sprint. I have a goal at the end of it, and for me, that has helped me implement my habit of reading. And as you said, it's probably 20 minutes a day that I spend on reading, yes, but I didn't think that it weighed, but now that you're saying it does, it really makes me feel good, and happy that
I like that you view it as a treat, Prit. That's what I really liked listening to you. I remember in college, I'd have to pay about $800 for all these textbooks for my classes, and all my friends always made fun of me because I'd buy all these textbooks, but then I'd always also buy like a $10 John Grisham novel. And people are like, well, why'd you buy that? I'm like, if I'm going to spend $800 for a bunch of books, I want at least one of the books to be a book I want to read.
That's That's true. That's absolutely true. Yes, I totally agree with that. And for me personally, I don't like reading business books is part of my job, is how I take it. I don't keep it as a hobby. For me, my hobby would be my asterisk comic books or other my romance novels or something like that. Because I
Yeah.
feel like when I'm reading business books, I'm constantly thinking about business. So I don't consider that to be part of my hobby time. So
Agreed.
business, it's easier for me to implement reading business books because it's a part of my job. So I take it that way, and I take it very seriously, and it's easier for me to get into the habit for that. But it's those relaxed hobby reading time that I feel like I miss out on,
Yeah.
and I struggle with a lot, especially to take some time and enjoy getting into a different world altogether, whether it's fantasy or something else. So it's
I
really
love it.
nice that you say 20 minutes is all that it takes, and that absolutely has made me feel really light and happy about the whole
Well,
thing.
and the great thing, Fred, about reading is I've never watched a TV show and afterwards thought, wow, I feel really fulfilled that I watched that TV show. But every
Yes.
time I finish a book, I feel like I've actually accomplished something.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely feel that. I definitely feel that. And on a personal note, I want to ask you, what has reading, like, how has reading changed your way of life or your perception of life, or how has it added value to you and your life?
Wow. I mean, Fred, that's a great question. I mean, it is my life at this point. Some people collect cars, some people collect stamps. I collect stories. I love being able, as a speaker, and I speak to different audiences. So if I'm speaking to a corporate audience, I need a certain set of anecdotes for the corporate audience, as opposed to parents. I have to have different stories for parents. Men versus women are different stories. Speaking in India versus in Egypt are going to be different stories. So I'm constantly reading to learn things. I'll give you an example. I'm a visiting distinguished professor at the American University in Cairo. And before the pandemic, I was in Cairo for a month. And beyond my university duties, I wanted to really go out to schools and work with parents and help them get their kids excited about reading. And so they booked me for a Muslim school, and I'd never been to an Islamic school. It was incredible, Prit. I mean, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 400 parents showed up for a training, and all the guys had long beards, and all the women were in burqas. And we were talking like you and I are talking right now. And I thought, shame on me. I had a lot of preconceptions, and I'm like, wow, people really are people. And it turned out to be my greatest audience, because the story I told them, I said, well, I was reading this book the other day. Have any of you ever read the Quran? And they all laughed and like, oh, well, then you know the story in the Quran where the angel Gabriel appears to Muhammad in the cave. What's his first instruction of Muhammad? Because the first pillar of Islam is to read. And so I looked at the parents and I said, so not only should we get your kids reading, it's actually written in your most sacred text. It's your duty to get your kids reading. And all of a sudden, everybody was like this. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like my ideal audience. I would have never gotten that story had I not invested the time in reading the Quran. Who am I? Like, so when I was in India, I kept on seeing pictures of this guy when I was in Tamil Nadu. So I'm like, I got to get a book on this guy. And Abdul Kalam is just this amazing human being. And I'm like, I've never even heard of him. It's actually the book I'm writing right now. The last book I wrote was called Leadership Begins with Motivation. And it's all kinds of short stories about successful people in different fields. And this was interesting, Prit. After I finished it, I read it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, almost all of my examples are of white male Americans. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so the book I'm writing, and that was interesting. I'm like, I wonder why that was. But so the book I'm writing right now is the same type of book, but all of the stories are about minorities, females, and international people. And so one of the stories I was just writing a couple of weeks ago was about this farmer boy. He was like 18 in Northeast India, in this river, And on the island and the river, there was such a bad drought, he noticed there was 200 dead snakes. And basically, he was a farmer, and they weren't able to farm anymore because the drought was just destroying the land. And so the next day, he planted a tree. And the day after that, he planted a tree. This is a guy who doesn't know how to read and write. He's just a poor farmer. Well, in 2015, the Indian government gave this guy their highest honor. The forest that he's created from planting one tree a day over the last 40 years is over 2,000, it's like 2,000 acres. It's twice the size of Central Park. There's a herd of 100 elephants that live there now. There's like all these animals, rare birds. And all that simple man did was he did one simple thing a day. This gets back to you, Prit, with your reading, just spending the 20 minutes. It's the little things, not the big things. And the reason I'm writing this book is I'm going all around the world with people, and I'm like, it's fascinating how we all focus on this person. I mean, again, when I was in India, India was a real joy to me because Gandhi had a huge impact of me, not just the book, actually the movie also. When I saw the movie, and so I'm like, I have to take trains across India. It's just the colors are so vibrant. And India was actually better than I could have ever expected. I could be a vegetarian if I lived in India. Indians know how to use spices. It's fantastic. But it was just fascinating learning, so I'm a naive American. I thought Indira Gandhi was like Gandhi's daughter, she's not related to him at all. And I'm like, so it's interesting just learning about and then learning about one of the things that impressed me the most about India, and I'm sorry that I'm just focused on India right now for the audience, but there was something that really impressed me was if you look at the top 20 most admired people in India, they were all business leaders, entrepreneurs, engineers, scientists, and teachers. In America, it's all movie stars, athletes, singers. And I keep on warning America, I'm like, you better watch it. India is going to surpass us very soon. I mean, it's true. I see it. When I was working with little kids and watching the math that they were being taught, I'm like, this is like, you're like 6 years old. They don't teach this until they're 16 in America. You're like, I mean, when I left India, I seriously started telling people in America, I don't know if we should teach math and science anymore because we are so far behind India. I mean, so far behind, and that's not to disparage America. America has other things that we're better at, and that's what freaks me. People always look at negatives and stuff. I'm like, no, let's look at the positive. Let's figure out what we can learn from one another. I've always said it's a big mistake in America. We get a lot of India's best students to come to our universities, and then we don't allow them to keep their visas to stay here, which I think is a big mistake because now they're going back to India and they're starting businesses that are in direct competition with America, and their businesses are better. It's happening right now. And I'm getting very excited about that. My reading program, I was speaking with the Minister of Education, and he's very nice to me. He's like, my product in America is $297 US. And he's like, we love your product, Danny, but it is way too expensive for us. And I said, Mr. Minister, I'll give it to you for $1 a kid. Just make sure every kid in India gets it. And the reason I got that idea, this is your entrepreneurial brain, was going into a McDonald's in India. I noticed that the price of a value meal was like 1/10 of the price of what it would be in America. And then I realized, I understand, it's volume. You can sell it at a cheaper price if you're selling it to 1 billion people a day. And I'm like, that's India. And this is, there's two things I would emphasize to any human being is you need to read a lot of books, you need to travel the world because you get insight. You start to see, you really start to look at things in different ways. And you try and see things from people's points of view, which I think serves you well. So again, that's a very long answer to a short question, but I get really excited about these things.
It's really heartwarming. It's so nice. I can really see the passion. I mean, for those of you who are listening on the podcast, there's definitely going to be a YouTube version of this video, of this entire podcast episode. And, I can see the fire in you. I can see the passion in you. And as an entrepreneur myself, I think that it's the very few lucky people who get to find their passion in life, and they get to follow it as well. They get to see it through. And it's so heartwarming for me to see how passionate you are. You found your passion. You are doing all you can to make sure that you are doing your mission of getting everyone to cultivate reading habits, kids especially. And that's really nice. It's really nice, Danny. And I think one thing that I want to point out is I've had the privilege of being exposed to 3 different education systems in my life. Singapore while growing up, India for my engineering, and then US for my MBA. And they are extremely distinct education systems. And they have, I don't know, each education system has given me so much ammunition because they have been so different from each other. Mm-hmm. And even as an entrepreneur and a business owner, I can see how each of these education systems have contributed to me holistically. I do something business related and I'm like, oh, okay, that's a little bit of Singapore there. And then I do something else and then I was like, oh, I learned that from India. And then another thing is like, oh, America is coming in right over here. So when you say, the different education systems, the power of different education systems, there are pros, there are cons, yes. But if we were to take the pros from each of the education systems that are available, I think that it really enriches your life in a very different way, in a very positive way. And I think traveling the world, yes, absolutely. Reading books, absolutely. I think these are 2 things that have enriched my life as well and changed my perception on the world, changed my perception of the kind of life that I want to lead as well. So I think, it's a more fulfilled life. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that. And I was one of those people where the visa, I did my MBA in a US university, and then the work visa didn't get processed and I had to come back to India. And for me, starting a business when I'm in India, it has been challenging, but at the same time, it has been very, very fulfilling as well. And yeah, I really, I hope that someday I'll be able to tell young Indian girls that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You could even be in India and your parents don't want to let you go out. It's fine. You can find your success wherever you are. And I hope that someday I get to tell them that. I hope that, I do that. So
I will support you in that anytime you need, Fred. I love it. And they need it because those little girls, there's something that you have that I'll never have, is you're an Indian woman. Like they look at you and they're like, if she could do it, maybe I can do it.
Absolutely.
That's very important.
Absolutely. So I'm definitely, I'm so happy that I met you and, getting an insight, such a close insight to what you do for children across the world, and also, helping adults, helping parents, because I'm pretty sure they're quite lost, when it concerns cultivating reading habits for their kids. I know that my dad really struggled because I was really mischievous. I would try to find ways to make him forget reading time every night, or, say I was sleepy. I know he struggled a lot to get me to read. And even in the library, I think I was running around, probably, getting scolded by the librarian, doing all sorts of things, embarrassing them and stuff like that. So I know they went through a lot to get me to read. So I'm sure that parents must be really lost, and, helping them understand that, yes, this is something that you can do. This is a mindset change that you have to first make for yourself and then for your kids. And then now, as an extension of that, helping business owners, helping entrepreneurs. It's really nice for me to have such a close insight to all the good work that you're doing. So kudos to that.
Thank you.
Alrighty, Danny, if we were to wrap up this entire episode, which I feel like we've spoken so much, and I've literally written down every single tip that you've mentioned. There's a lot. But if we were to wrap up this entire episode into 3 actionable tips that can help my viewers to start reading right away, right after this podcast episode, what would it be?
Well, the first one I'm going to give you is I want to serve you and your audience and give everybody some gifts. And so if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, danny.com, free gift from danny.com. I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book, I wrote it for a school principal who was trying to think of ways to positively engage his faculty. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. And so every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. And then I'm also going to give you access to a 5-day reading challenge I recently did online for about 700 parents worldwide, where every day for 5 consecutive days, I give you an hour of all kinds of tips on how to get you and your child excited about reading, because the more excited you are to read, the more likely you are to read, and the more you read, the better you get. You'll also be probably receiving at least one positive message a week for the rest of your life from me, keeping you positively focused. We're losing too much of the positivity in the world. That's why I want to be around the Prits of the world. We need your sparkle, your magic, that shine. As far as a couple of practical tips on how to get people reading more, the first thing I always recommend to parents is turn on the closed captioning on the television set, the subtitles. And people say, well, wait a sec, if the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? And I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain is directed towards that text. And there's actually research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every country on the planet except for one. The country that watches the most TV has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people say, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they import all these old American comedies like Happy Days and Brady Bunch, and they have to subtitle them in Finnish all the time. So turn on the closed captioning, and I guess I'll end with what I think is what your dad did. The single most important thing all of us can do as parents is to read aloud with our kids. And I've actually worked with parents that don't even know how to read, and it doesn't matter. As long as you can look at the pictures, you can tell the story. And I've had kids that actually learned how to read from a non-literate parent, and then they realized their parent wasn't literate. And there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, this is a little bit more, we can't have a research about it, but it's that bond. Did you hear how highly you spoke of your father, Prit? I mean, I love those stories. At the end of my program, I always tell people, I'm like, hey, it's been 67 days. I know your kid's reading more, they're reading better, and they love reading. Our typical student boosts their reading ability by 2 to 3 grade levels in just over 2 months, which is all fine and good. But what's really cool and what's exciting to me is that the kid now is going to be a reader for life. They're not reading because they have to, they're reading because they get to. And most importantly, I point out to parents is, I just forced you to spend 20 minutes a day one-on-one with your child. How many of us adults would not have died to have had 20 minutes of attention from our parents every single day? I mean, I just gave you the gift of time with your child. The world, we've mentioned time management a couple of times in this interview, and we're making things happen too quickly, I think. I'm hoping that one of the positive lessons from the pandemic is that people learn to slow down and value family and friends, sharing a nice meal together and a conversation, not having a bunch of screens in front of us all the time, being able to talk to one another. And hopefully, and that's the most important thing, is what can we do to be a little bit kinder to one another. And so, Prit, the thing that I've always told my students, they always have to hear the same refrain, whether it's my little ones or my older ones, as they exit my classroom, I always say the same thing. I always say, remember kids, education is valuable, but execution is priceless. Knowledge is not power. Only applied knowledge is power. Knowing what the right thing to do and doing the right thing are two very different things. So go out, do the right thing, and make this world a better place.
Oh, that's really, really wonderful. And I'm so sure that my listeners are going to have so many valuable lessons to take away from this podcast episode. Thank you so much, Danny. It has been such a pleasure to have you on my podcast episode. You know, it's just been such an honor to talk to you and to have you give your valuable knowledge to us.
Likewise, Britt. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are listening, you know, Danny, if they want to find you, where can they find you? I know you've given a few links, but let's, you know, kind of give them maybe your website, your social media pages. Where can they find you?
I'll just send you that so you can put it in the notes because it's
okay. Perfect. All
I'm
right.
driving. I don't want people getting in an accident listening to my hashtags.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, you guys, I'm going to definitely put them in the links in the description below. So definitely do check that out if you want to reach out to Danny. He's on LinkedIn, I'm sure, and he's also on Instagram as well, from what I know. So I'm going to put those links in the description box. Definitely do reach out to him if you have any more questions, or if you'd like to follow Danny to see more of the wonderful work that he's doing across the world. For those of you who are listening all the way up until here, thank you so much for listening. It has been a pleasure for me to record this episode for you, and I hope that you have taken away as many wonderful lessons as I have personally taken from this podcast episode with Danny. So thank you so much. I will catch you guys in my next podcast episode. Bye, guys.